Minions! Tonight, we steal the moon!
Let me guess, you saw the hype, you saw the design, you saw Columbina Hyposelenia, the Damselette, the Moon Maiden herself, and you said, yeah, I'm pulling for her. But now she's on your account, and you're sitting there wondering how to actually use her, what team she works in, and whether she's even friendly for free-to-play players. Well, don't worry, because I'm here to save you from the confusion and walk you through everything you need to know on how to build and play Columbina properly. Hello everyone, my name is Belle, and today we're discussing everything Columbina, one of the most elegant yet quietly destructive hydro catalysts to ever take the stage in Genshin Impact. Columbina isn't just another hydro applicator that you slot into random teams. She's a full lunar reaction engine designed specifically to enable, amplify, and even directly trigger lunar reaction damage while spending very little time on the field herself. She applies long-lasting AoE hydro, buffs lunar reaction damage for the entire team, and periodically fires off extra reaction damage depending on what your team is doing. Because of that, her value depends much more on how your team is built than on raw solo damage, and that's something we'll keep coming back to throughout this guide. So in this video, I'll be covering her Ascension and talent materials, a full breakdown of her kit and talents, the best weapons and best free-to-play options, artifact sets and stat priorities, constellation value, talent leveling order, and of course team comps and rotations for all three lunar reaction types, Bloom, Charged, and Crystallize. So by the end of this video, you should have a very clear idea of how to build her with whatever characters and weapons you already have. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Enjoygm, which is a fast, secure, and affordable top-up service for games like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, Zenless Zone Zero, and Withering Waves. So if you're planning to pull for Columbina, Ineffa, or any upcoming banners, this is a really good way to top up without paying full in-game prices. Using Enjoygm is super easy. You just go to their website, select your game, choose the pack you want, enter your UID and server only, and complete the payment. You don't need to enter your password at all, so your account stays safe the entire time. They also often run special discounts that are cheaper than official top-ups, support global payment options, and have 24/7 customer support if you ever need help with your order. I'll have my exclusive Enjoygm link in the description and pinned comment, and using that link also helps support the channel. Huge thanks to Enjoygm for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back to the Moon Maiden herself. Let's start with what you'll need to raise her, because planning your farming early saves a lot of resin and a lot of headaches later. Columbina gains crit rate as her Ascension stat for a total of 19.2% crit rate at level 90, which already makes building her much easier since you won't need to chase crit rate nearly as hard on your artifacts. To fully ascend Columbina from level 1 to level 90, you will need a total of 420,000 mora. For boss materials, she requires 46 Radiant Antler from her world boss. For elemental gemstones, you'll need the full hydro set, which is 1 Veronata sliver, 9 fragments, 9 chunks, and 6 gemstones. Her local specialty is Winter Ice Leah, and you'll need 168 of them in total. For enemy drops, she uses slime materials, specifically 18 slime condensate, 30 slime secretions, and 36 slime concentrate. Now for talents, and this part is important because talent costs add up extremely fast. To raise a single talent from level 1 to level 10, you will need 1,625,500 mora, 1 Crown of Insight, 6 of the new weekly boss materials, and Moonlight talent books in the following amounts: 3 Teachings of Moonlight, 21 Guides to Moonlight, and 38 Philosophies of Moonlight. On top of that, you'll also need slime drops again, specifically 6 slime condensate, 22 slime secretions, and 31 slime concentrate per talent. If you plan to triple crown her, all of that is multiplied by 3, so definitely plan your resources carefully. Now that we covered what it takes to raise her, let's get into how Columbina actually works, because her kit explains almost all of her build and team decisions. At a high level, Columbina's gameplay revolves around 3 things: the gravity ripple created by her skill, the lunar domain created by her burst, and the automatic bonus reaction damage called gravity interference that triggers when your team is consistently using lunar reactions. Her normal attacks are standard hydro catalyst attacks and generally aren't important unless you're playing on-field Bloom, but her charged attack becomes relevant when you start generating a resource called Verdant Dew, which happens whenever your team triggers Lunar Bloom reactions. When Columbina has at least 1 Verdant Dew, her charged attack becomes a special version that does not consume stamina, consumes 1 Verdant Dew, and deals 3 instances of AoE Dendro damage that count as Lunar Bloom damage. This is what what allows her to function as a bloom driver if you want to keep her on the field rather than using her purely as an off-field unit. Her elemental skill, Eternal Tides, is the centerpiece of her entire kit. When you press skill, she deals AoE hydro damage and summons Gravity Ripple, which follows your active character and applies AoE hydro damage every 2 seconds for up to 25 seconds. That duration is extremely long, and in most teams it means that pressing her skill once covers nearly your entire rotation's hydro application. While Gravity Ripple is active, whenever your team triggers lunar reactions or deals lunar reaction damage, Columbina builds a resource called Gravity. She can store up to 60 gravity, and once she reaches that limit, she automatically triggers Gravity Interference, dealing bonus damage based on which lunar reaction your team has triggered the most. Lunar Charged teams trigger an Electro AoE hit, Lunar Bloom teams fire multiple Dendro projectiles, and Lunar Crystallize teams trigger a Geo AoE hit. Boy, is that a tongue tie. This is why she's so flexible. She doesn't force you into one reaction type, she simply enhances whatever reaction your team is already built around. Her burst, Moonlit Melancholy, creates a field called Lunar Domain, dealing AoE hydro damage on cast and increasing all party members' lunar reaction damage while they are inside the field, which is why bursting every rotation is so important for her overall value and why energy recharge becomes such an important stat on her builds. Her passive talents further reinforce her identity as an HP scaling reaction buffer. One passive gives her stacking crit rate when Gravity Interference triggers, another improves reaction effects inside Lunar Domain depending on reaction type, and her special passive increases base lunar reaction damage based on her max HP, up to a cap of 7%. This is why HP is not just a defensive stat on Columbina, it directly increases your team's reaction damage. Once you understand that Columbina scales with HP, crit, and energy recharge, her weapon and artifact choices start to make a lot more sense. Her signature weapon, Nocturne's Curtain Call, is easily her best option, providing crit damage, max HP, energy restoration, and lunar reaction bonuses that all work while she's off-field. It covers nearly every stat she wants and smooths her rotations at the same time. Reliquary of Truth is another strong premium option, especially in Lunar Bloom teams, since it provides crit damage, crit rate, and large elemental mastery buffs after using skill, making it very strong if Columbina is playing on-field. Sacrificial Jade is excellent for off-field builds thanks to its HP and EM bonuses, but you do need to be careful not to overcap crit rate since Columbina already gains crit from Ascension and passives. Wave Riding Whirl is more of a comfort option, providing energy recharge and HP scaling, and it becomes especially useful in double hydro teams where you want smoother rotations rather than maximum personal damage. For free-to-play players, Favonius Codex is often the best overall option because it provides energy recharge and generates particles for the entire team, which makes rotations significantly more consistent. Prototype Amber is a great craftable alternative that provides HP, energy regeneration after burst, and small team healing, which is very useful in teams that don't already have strong sustain. Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers can also be used if you want Columbina to function more as a pure buffer for an attack scaling carry, but this comes at a cost of her own damage contribution, so it's usually more of a niche choice. For most 5-star weapons, refinements are not necessary at all, and you should never feel pressured to refine them because the damage increase per refinement is relatively small compared to the cost. So if you do have a 5-star weapon like Nocturne's Curtain Call or Reliquary of Truth, R1 is perfectly fine, and you'll already be getting most of their value right there. For 4-star weapons, refinements matter a lot more. Weapons like Favonius Codex scale heavily with refinement because the particle generation chance and cooldown improve significantly, so if you're using Favonius on Columbina, getting it to R5 is very noticeable and very worth it, especially for your team's energy. Prototype Amber also benefits a lot from refinements, since higher refinement means more energy regeneration and more healing for the whole team after burst, so ideally you want to do this at R5 if possible, since it's craftable and refinable over time. On the other hand, weapons like Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers should always be at R5 because the attack buff scales directly with refinement, and there's really no reason not to max it if you're using it. For limited 4-star weapons like Sacrificial Jade or Wave Riding Whirl, refinements are nice to have but not mandatory. Higher refinements improve HP and EM bonuses or energy comfort, but even at R1 they're still very usable, so don't feel like you need perfect refinements for Columbina to perform well. In general, prioritize refining your craftable and Favonius weapons, don't stress about refining 5 stars, and treat limited 4-star refinements as a bonus rather than a requirement. Artifacts are where you really decide what role Columbina is playing on your team. If you're using her mainly as an off-field damage dealer, Obeyed of Morningstar and Moon is her best personal damage set, boosting lunar reaction damage while she's off-field and scaling further with moon sign levels. If you're playing playing her as an on-field Bloom driver, then Night of the Sky's Unveiling becomes her best option, boosting crit and Team Lunar reaction damage while she is actively attacking. If your team needs more support rather than personal damage, Silken Moon's Serenade is extremely valuable because it provides energy recharge and strong team-wide elemental mastery buffs, which benefit almost every Lunar reaction team. In Bloom teams specifically, Deepwood Memories is often mandatory if no other Dendro unit is carrying it, since the Dendro Resistance Shred significantly boosts Bloom damage. And in teams where your main carry scales on attack, Tenacity of the Millilith can be used to provide HP for Columbina and an attack buff for the whole team. For main stats, Columbina usually wants HP or ER on Sands, depending on whether she can burst comfortably, HP on Goblet, and either crit or HP on Circlet depending on your weapon and substats. In substats, you prioritize enough ER to burst every rotation, then HP percentage, then crit, with EM being lower priority unless you are focusing heavily on Bloom. Now, if you're not free to play and you're using a 5-star weapon, better artifact quality, or you have constellations like C1 or C2, your stat targets can be pushed quite a bit higher, and this is what you should realistically be aiming for. Ideally, you want Columbina sitting around 38,000 to 45,000 HP, about 80 to 90% crit rate, and 200 to 230 crit damage, while keeping your energy recharge at roughly 150 to 170% if you're running double Hydro or have energy support, or closer to 170 to 180% if she's solo Hydro. At this level of investment, most of your damage scaling will come from HP and crit rather than reaction bonuses alone, and you'll also notice much stronger gravity interference procs. For free-to-play players, a reasonable and very achievable stat goal is around 32,000 to 36,000 HP, 75 to 85% crit rate, 170 to 190% crit damage, and roughly 180 to 190% energy recharge depending on your weapon and team. This is more than enough for her to perform very well in endgame content, especially since her reaction damage and buffs do not require extreme personal stats to be effective. Now let's talk about Columbina's constellations, because while she's already very strong at C0, her constellations mostly focus on increasing her personal damage and adding extra reaction-based utility for the team rather than fundamentally changing how she plays. Starting with Constellation 1, this allows Columbina to immediately trigger an effect equivalent to gravity interference when she uses her elemental skill, and this can happen once every 15 seconds. In addition to that, when gravity interference is triggered, you can also get extra bonuses depending on which lunar reaction your team is triggering the most. For Lunar Charged teams, the active character recovers 6 energy, which helps smooth rotations. For Lunar Bloom teams, the active character gains increased interruption resistance for 8 seconds, making on-field play much more comfortable. And for Lunar Crystallize teams, she summons a Rainsia shield that absorbs damage equal to 12% of Columbina's max HP, and absorbs Hydro damage with 250% effectiveness for 8 seconds. On top of that, all nearby party members gain 1.5% increased lunar reaction damage. Overall, C1 adds utility and comfort rather than raw damage, and it can be especially nice for crystallized teams that appreciate the extra shielding and for charged teams that want energy refund. Moving on to Constellation 2, this is her first real damage spike. C2 increases the rate at which Columbina accumulates gravity by 34%, meaning gravity interference will trigger more frequently. After gravity interference is triggered, Columbina also gains Lunar Brilliance, which increases her max HP by 40% for 8 seconds, directly boosting both her personal damage and her reaction scaling. Gravity interference also grants extra buffs to the active character depending on reaction type. Lunar Charge gives attack equal to 1% of Columbina's max HP, Lunar Bloom increases elemental mastery by 0.35% of her max HP, and Lunar Crystallize increases defense by 1% of her max HP. In addition to all of that, party-wide lunar reaction damage is increased by 7%. This constellation greatly improves both her damage and her buffing, and this is generally considered her best stopping point for players who want to invest beyond C0. Constellation 3 simply increases the level of her elemental skill by 3, which directly increases her Hydro damage and the damage from 1.5% party-wide lunar reaction damage. It's a straightforward damage increase, but not a major gameplay changer. Constellation 4 helps with her energy and burst consistency. When gravity interference is triggered, Columbina restores 4 energy to herself. Additionally, when gravity interference triggers, its damage is increased based on her maxed HP, HP depending on reaction type, 12.5% of max HP for Lunar Charged, 2.5% of max HP for Lunar Bloom, and 12.5% of max HP for Lunar Crystallize, and this can happen once every 15 seconds. You also get another 1.5 party-wide lunar reaction damage. This constellation mainly helps reduce her energy recharge requirements and slightly boosts her reaction burst damage. Constellation 5 increases the level of her elemental burst by 3, which improves the lunar reaction damage bonus provided by her lunar domain, and again adds another 1.5% party-wide lunar reaction damage. This is another straightforward scaling constellation focused on buff strength. Finally, Constellation 6 is where her team support becomes much stronger. For 8 seconds after characters inside lunar domain trigger a lunar reaction, the crit damage of the corresponding elemental damage is increased by 80% depending on the element involved in the reaction. These crit damage buffs do not stack for the same element, but they provide an enormous spike in damage for reaction-focused DPS units. On top of that, party-wide lunar reaction damage is increased by 7%. This constellation significantly boosts team damage rather than just Columbina's own numbers, and it's what turns her into a powerful endgame reaction buffer. Overall, Columbina's kit is fully functional at C0, and none of her constellations are required for her to perform well. C1 adds comfort and utility, C2 is her biggest early power strike with strong HP-based buffs and faster gravity generation, and C6 provides massive team crit damage buffs for reaction teams. For most players, the most efficient investment path is usually weapon first, then C1, then C2, and stopping at C2 is completely reasonable if you don't plan to go all the way to C6. As for what talents to actually level first, Columbina's elemental skill should always be your top priority. This is where her gravity ripple comes from, and it controls both her hydro application and most of her damage. Her elemental burst is second priority because leveling it increases how much lunar reaction damage your entire team gets inside her lunar domain. Her normal attacks can usually stay at level 1 unless you specifically plan to play her on field in Lunar Bloom teams, where her special charged attack becomes part of your main damage loop. Now that we've gone over Columbina's skill and burst, I want to take a moment to talk about her passive talents, because this is where a lot of her quiet power is hiding. These passives are also the reason Columbina feels so easy to build once you understand what she's actually scaling with. Her first Ascension passive is Lunacy's Lure. Whenever gravity interface is triggered, Columbina gains the Lunacy effect, which increases her crit rate by 5% for 10 seconds, and this can stack up to 3 times for a total of 15% crit rate. In real gameplay, you'll trigger gravity interference consistently as long as your team is doing what it's supposed to do, which is triggering lunar reactions. So this crit rate buff ends up having very good uptime. This is also a big reason why I always tell people not to panic build crit rate on Columbina. Between her Ascension stat giving her 19.2% crit rate at level 90 and Lunacy's Lure potentially giving up to 15% more, she can naturally sit at a very comfortable crit rate even before you start maxing her artifacts. If you overbuild crit rate too hard, you risk creeping towards 100% and wasting stats, so this passive directly influences how you balance her build. Her fourth Ascension passive is Law of the New Moon, and this one is all about making your lunar domain even more valuable. When characters within the lunar domain trigger lunar reactions, they gain an extra bonus based on the reaction type. So again, Columbina isn't forcing you into one archetype, she's rewarding whichever lunar reaction your team is focused on. If you're playing Lunar Charged, then when the Thundercloud performs lightning strikes against a valid target, it has a 33% chance to perform an additional lightning strike. That's basically free extra procs, and over the length of a rotation, it adds up to a noticeable chunk of damage. If you're playing Lunar Bloom, then when your team triggers Lunar Bloom reactions, the party gains a special resource called Moonridge Dew, and you can gain up to 3 Moonridge Dews every 18 seconds. This reinforces Bloom's ramping, sustained damage style, and it's one of the reasons Bloom teams can feel very snowbally under Columbina's burst. And if you're playing Lunar Crystallize, then when Moondrift Harmony is triggered, each Moondrift has a 33% chance to inflict an extra attack. So in simple terms, this passive is giving you extra reaction value in all 3 archetypes, Charged, Bloom, and Crystallized, as long as you're fighting inside her domain, which is why keeping her burst in rotation matters so much. Next is her utility passive, Lunar Vigil. This one isn't about damage, but it's still worth mentioning because it's a genuine quality of life perk if you're exploring in the right region. If one of your party members is down while you're in Notcry, Columbina will revive that specific character. The amount of HP the revived character has is based on Columbina's friendship level, and this can happen once every 100 seconds. It's not something that affects Spiral Abyss or combat performance directly, but it's nice because it fits her theme and it makes exploration feel a bit more safer. And finally, this is the passive that really explains why Columbina is such a centerpiece for Lunar teams, Moon Sign Benediction. This passive does two major things, and are both extremely important. First, when a party member triggers Lunar Charged, Bloom, or Hydro Crystallize, that reaction is converted into a lunar version. So Lunar Charged becomes Lunar Charged, Bloom becomes Lunar Bloom, and Hydro Crystallize becomes Lunar Crystallize. This means Columbina is effectively turning familiar reaction patterns into lunar reaction patterns, which is why she can enable lunar teams so reliably. The second part is where her HP scaling becomes a true team buff. Lunar reaction damage inflicted by party members gains a base damage increase based on Columbina's max HP. For every 1000 max HP, the base damage of lunar reactions increases by 0.2% up to a maximum of 7%. So you're not stacking HP on Columbina just to make her tanky. You're stacking HP because it directly raises your team's reaction performance. And then as a final bonus, when Columbina is in the party, your team's moon sign increases by 1 level, which makes it easier to reach higher moon sign thresholds for certain artifact effects and team synergies. So when you put all of these passives together, Columbina's identity becomes really clear. She's designed to be the core of a lunar reaction team, she provides long-lasting hydro application, she buffs reaction damage through her burst, she gets free crit rate through Lunacy's lore to make building easier, and she adds extra reaction behavior inside Lunar Domain, depending on which reaction archetype you're running. This is also why her builds naturally prioritize HP, crit, and enough energy recharge to burst consistently, because all of those stats feed back into the reaction engine she's powering. Now let's talk about teams and how to actually play them, because this is where Columbina truly shows her flexibility. In Lunar Bloom teams, the goal is to maintain consistent Hydro and Dendro application while stacking elemental mastery buffs and letting Bloom reactions do the majority of the damage. In on-field Bloom setups, your rotation usually starts by applying Dendro and any buffs first, then using Columbina's skill and burst, and finally swapping to your main DPS or driver to trigger Bloom reactions until it's time to reset. In on-field Bloom setups, you still set up Dendro and buffs first, then use Columbina's skill and burst, and then stay on Columbina using her special charged attacks to spend Verdant Dew and trigger Bloom damage directly before swapping out to refreshed buffs and application. For free-to-play players, Dendro, Traveler, or Kale work very well as Deepwood holders, Anemo, Traveler, or Lynette can replace Sucrose for grouping and swirl, and Yao Yao or Barbara can provide healing if needed. In Lunar Charged teams, the goal is consistent Electro and Hydro application to trigger repeated charged reactions. Your rotation typically starts with setting up Electro supports and Anemo buffs, then casting Columbina's skill and burst, and finally swapping to your main DPS or driver to trigger reactions until cooldowns reset. Columbina should always press skill and burst before swapping off so that Gravity Ripple and Lunar Domain are active during your damage window. Premium Electro units like Flynn's or Ineffa work very well here, but for free-to-play players, Fischl and Beto are excellent replacements, and Anemo, Traveler, or Lynette can again replace Sucrose if needed. Drivers like Razor, Lisa, or Sethos can all function depending on what you have built. In Lunar Crystallize teams, the focus shifts toward Geo Synergy, shields, and steady reaction damage. These teams are very stable and comfortable to play. Your rotation usually starts with Geo buffers or shielders, then Columbina's skill and burst, and then your Geo DPS takes field time while reactions and buffs remain active. For free-to-play players, Noelle can act as both driver and healer, Geo Traveler or Ningguang can serve as damage dealers, and Goro can provide defense buffs if you're running defense scaling Geo units. So in short, is Columbina free-to-play friendly? And the short answer is yes, as long as you plan to play Lunar reaction teams. She works extremely well at C0, has excellent free-to-play weapon options, scales with multiple stats, and contributes meaningful damage while off-field, which makes her forgiving to build and play. Her only real limitation is that she isn't really meant for non-lunar teams, and solo Hydro setups may require more energy recharge investment. But if lunar reactions are part of your roster plans, Columbina is one of the strongest and most flexible Hydro units you can invest in as a free-to-play player. And that's everything you need to know about Columbina, from her materials and kit to her builds, rotations, teams, and long-term value. If you guys would like, I can also make follow-up videos that focus entirely on Bloom reactions, charge team optimization, and Crystallize and Geo Synergy in more detail. Let me know what kind of teams you're planning to run and what you'd like to see next. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.